America's safety net, the creation of Social Security. In the 1930s, the Great Depression brought America's wealth down to a point of utter destitution. The nation experienced a striking period of economic depression. 16 million people, or up to 25% of the nation's total population, found themselves without a job. Over the course of just 3 years, the average American was making 40% less money, and the stock market lost 40% of its gross value. $26 billion worth of wealth virtually disappeared from the formerly prosperous market.
Great American corporations suffered monumental financial losses. AT&T lost one-third of its value, and General Electric was subjected to a 50% drop in its total worth. In once thriving metropolitan hubs like Chicago and New York, breadlines stretched for blocks. People would wait for hours to receive meager portions, inadequate for feeding their families. Banks closed and the life savings of many people vanished, spreading poverty across the nation at an alarming rate. To respond to the awful economic conditions, the American people elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt as their president. The expectations for FDR were colossal, and people looked to him for innovative solutions to bring America back from the Depression.
Raw materials stand unused, factories stand idle, railroad traffic continues to dwindle, merchants sell less and less, while millions of able-bodied men and women in dire need are clamoring for the opportunity to work. Roosevelt took immediate action as president. Though he received more than he bargained for, FDR was ready for this period of depression, and responded with an abundance of new programs during his first 100 days in office. This collection of reforms was dubbed the New Deal. Among different bills, acts, and projects, the Social Security Act became the most well-known part of the New Deal. Roosevelt even considered it to be the cornerstone of his administration.
The Social Security Act of 1935 marked the creation of the first successful federal aid program in the U.S. The bill prompted people to take responsibility for their fellow Americans through the government. Impoverished Americans became entitled to receive economic support in order to soften their poverty. Social Security represents two functions in American life. It refers to the elderly insurance system created by the Social Security Act of 1935. It also describes a less finite goal, protection for all citizens against foreseeable suffering, including poverty, homelessness, disabilities, and poor health.
At the time it was made, it was a source of relief for most people because they didn't have anything, and this was a way to make sure that they weren't in the poorhouse.
Roosevelt justified his approach by directly addressing the issues at hand. He often spoke to the country in his famous radio fireside chats, where he addressed common issues as needed and inspired economic and political activity. FDR believed it to be essential that Americans experimented with various programs to create jobs as fast and efficiently as possible. Dozens of programs were created, collectively called alphabet soup, since many had three-letter abbreviations like the CCC, WPA, AAA, and TVA.
Roosevelt's New Deal focused on the three R's: relief, recovery, and reform. Relief was provided directly through welfare programs so that poverty did not plague the nation. Recovery provided employment to get America's middle class back to work. Reform meant new ways to run the financial systems of the United States to prevent economic depression from happening in the future. Roosevelt convinced Americans that it is safer to keep your money in a reopened bank than it is to keep it under the mattress. Inspiring trust in America's financial system was crucial to getting the economy back into a functioning condition.
I think it really fundamentally altered how people connected to specifically the federal government's large national programs that affected millions of Americans. Prior to that, everything was on the local level.
During the 20th century, America experienced an unprecedented wave of urbanization. Twice as many people lived in cities as wage workers than before, so the economic crash of 1929 was especially detrimental. People's employers could no longer pay them, and the economic fates of countless factory workers were out of their hands. This culminated into the fact that families could no longer provide for individual security. Roosevelt thought the people were compelled to employ the active interest of the nation as a whole through government in order to encourage a greater security for each individual who composes it.
Prior to the Depression, a fair portion of Americans had some sort of pension plan. But with the advent of the Depression, the vast majority of Americans found themselves without a plan to support themselves in old age or protect themselves against the vicissitudes of life.
People did not provide pensions for, their employees a lot of times. And the people that were in settlement houses, that sort of thing, they were able to have some funds to survive.
Solutions to this problem sprang up from all around the country. Many would propose a privately run pension plan for seniors, but none were more influential towards the eventual creation of Social Security as Dr. Francis Townsend. Townsend was an elderly man of no real distinguishment who worried about retirement. His plan outlined a system where if you were retired, non-criminal, and spent your money within 30 days, you would receive a pension of $200 each month. The number of retirees supporting the program quickly swelled, and it was taken to Congress, where it was just closely defeated as the nation's old age security plan.
The Townsend Plan was not the answer to America's economic problems. To have accepted the Townsend Plan would have been ridiculous and would have damaged the economy still further. The Social Security Act was made as the answer to the issue of old age insurance. It was built as a self-supporting annuity plan, where citizens put in a minimum sum which then returns to them as a monthly payment starting at age 65. By creating a compulsory program, the bill made a system which, because of its large scale, was less subject to the ups, downs, and even crashes of the market. The document was signed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt on August 14, 1935. As Roosevelt put it,
"It seems to me that if the Senate and the House of Representatives in this long and arduous session had done nothing more than pass this security bill, the session would be regarded as historic for all time."
After 30 years, Social Security was to be a self-supportive system where the American people received in old age what they paid into during their earlier years.
Since employers and employees must contribute equal amounts to the Old Age Reserve account, both will be required to file forms under the Social Security Act.
As chairman of the Social Security Board, Arthur Altmeyer explains,
"The worker will pay 1/2, and his employer will pay 1/2. Each will pay 1 cent on every dollar of the worker's earnings. The men and women covered by the plan will receive an income for life after age 65 when they are no longer at work."
While the Social Security Act is not anticipated as a complete remedy for the abnormal conditions confronting us at the present time, it represents a substantial, necessary beginning. Francis Perkins was one of the major drafters of the bill and a driving force behind the passing of the legislation. As a former social worker and the head of Roosevelt's Labor Committee, she worked tirelessly to forge a bill to help the elderly, children, and the poor.
some people criticize the Social Security Act in seeming ungenerous compared to the Townsend Plan. Other Americans stuck to the belief of refusing any form of charity, feeling that the federal authorities should not create a compulsory plan.
Because it is a tax, and we are very tax phobic as a people, as a society. We don't like giving our money to the government. We don't necessarily trust the government to do what we feel is right with our money.
Despite this skepticism, the bill prevailed as a necessary provision for the country.
We have tried to frame a law which will give some measure of protection to the average citizen and to his family against the loss of a job and against poverty-stricken old age.
At its roots, the Social Security Act helped the elderly and impoverished live and retire more comfortably. However, the motives behind the bill were not strictly humanitarian. Having experienced a boom in population through the 1920s and into the 1930s, America's labor markets had become swamped with competition. The Social Security Act was tailored to counter this. By creating a compulsory pension program, the bill ensured that older workers could sensibly retire. This not only streamlined the labor force, but it put more money in the hands of seniors for them to pour back into the economy. With the Social Security Act in place, the U.S. economy was on the rise.
It's a safety blanket. It's a comfort to know that I work now and I'll be given that money back so that when I'm not working, I won't be in the poorhouse.
We believe in Social Security. We believe in work for the unemployed. We believe in saving homes.
With the Social Security Act, the government took responsibility for its citizens, ensuring that everyone, rich or poor, had every self-evident right. The American people upheld the responsibility of aiding each other by making the nation's economy one of the strongest in the world. Today, the legacy of Social Security still shines through, and each child born receives his or her own Social Security number. The safety net founded in the days of Roosevelt exists today in the form of food stamps, unemployment checks, and free health care. Social Security allows citizens of the United States to live without fear of constant suffering or aging by themselves with no financial support. And as Franklin Delano Roosevelt boldly stated to the American people,
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear